My name is Dennis Hambeukers, and I work as a strategic design consultant at an agency called Zuiderlicht. It was already mentioned, and we specialize in strategic design. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the impact of design. I think stating that design will save the world is maybe putting the bar for design a little bit too high. But on the other hand, stating that design won't save the world but just makes it look good is underselling design a little bit. So I think design can help, but maybe not in the way most people think. My perspective on design comes from that I've been working for 15 years as a designer, but I was originally trained as an engineer. So I still see myself as an engineer on a journey through design. But while I was studying engineering and I got my first taste of engineering projects, I wasn't really happy. I saw that there was no room for creativity, the projects were never on time and on budget, no value was created, and there was no fun in it. Everybody seemed to hate these projects, including me. And I didn't really know what it was at the time or how I could solve this, but my frustration drove me in a total opposite direction, and I went to art school, and I ended up working in design for the last 15 years. And through my journey through engineering and design, I learned that there are basically two ways of solving problems. One is called the scientific management way, and the other, the way of the designer. And I think the biggest difference between the two is that the scientific management way cuts problems into pieces and solves the little small pieces and then sticks them back together again. And the way of the designer attacks a problem more as a whole. So the scientific management way is more like people work in a factory, and the way of the designer is more like an atelier. And in my career, I discovered an interesting pattern. I mapped these two ways. Now you see the thick line is the way of the designer, and the thin line, the scientific management way. I mapped these, the problem-solving performance of these ways on complexity. And what I found that when you have a really simple problem, then the way of the designer outperforms the scientific management way. Because the small problem, cutting it up into pieces and organizing and making all kinds of rules, is actually overkill for small problems. But when problems get more complicated, it's actually a really good strategy to cut it up into simpler problems and solve the problems, the simple problems. And attacking a really complicated problem as a whole is actually too complicated. But one of the interesting things I found when I got into really complex problems, that the way of the designer actually performs better than the scientific management way. For somehow, when all the parts are connected to each other, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, the cutting up into pieces doesn't really work anymore. So, when I applied the things I learned from my work as a designer onto complex problems, I found that everything was much better. I could create space for creativity, create value for users, make the budget holders happy, and create engaging projects for all stakeholders and come up with desirable solutions. So, of course, I started asking why. Why is that? Why is that the way of the designer works better for complex problems? And what does it teach us about complex problems? Because I think we're just scratching the surface when it comes to solving complex problems. So I want to share with you today 10 things I learned from design that apparently are good, important for complex problem solving. And the first one is design systems thinking. And one of the things I learned is that designers are better at seeing the big picture, the small details, and connecting them. And it's actually very important when you want to solve complex problems. I found this actually what designers do all day. They're constantly zooming out and zooming in and constantly solving problems on different levels while trying to get the whole and the parts to work together. Like you see here, a design for a poster. When the designer starts, they think about the composition, then they dive into the details of the fonts, and go back into color combinations, and then dive back deep into white space. So they're constantly solving problems on different levels and constantly trying to make the whole work. Another thing I found was really important for solving complex problems is seeing objectively. Like seeing what's really in front of you and not just what you think is in front of you. And I found that designers actually see better than other people. Because the thing with seeing is that actually 95% of the things we see are actually what we think we see. Our brain uses models and assumptions for speed. This is how our brain was designed. And this was super useful when we were in the savannah and we had to make split-second life and death decisions. But these models, they also limit us to see what's really in front of us. And one of the things I learned in art school is that drawing is actually a really good exercise for seeing. When I was in still life drawing classes like this, the teachers would constantly walk around and tell the students, so no, just don't draw what you think you see, draw what you actually see. So there was a constant exercise in trying to let go of all the assumptions you had in your head and really draw what was in front of you. It actually helps you to see better. Another thing that's really important for complex problem solving is outside the box thinking, because the complex problems cannot really be solved with problems we already know. So we have to think a little bit outside the box. And I found the designers are less afraid to suggest crazy things, to draw outside the lines. But it's actually very dangerous to draw outside the lines, because seeing different requires courage. People might think you're stupid or you're crazy, so you need to feel safe to think different. But I also found that this courage is also a relative thing, because I found that when you have the label designer on your shirt, people expect you to do crazy things. So this actually takes the need for courage out of the box thinking, and I found that courage is actually more of a cultural thing than a personal thing. And personal responsibility. What I also found is that designers care more about their work. Of course, other people in other professions also care about what they do, but designers, they have more skin in the game, as I call it. And you can clearly see that when you criticize a design from a designer. They really take this personally, because they put so much of themselves into the designs, they really hurt. And this can be a nuisance for designers, but in the end, this makes sure that their caring and ownership makes them take extra steps, put in more of themselves, and create better solutions. Aligning to human nature is also an important thing, because if we work in a way that's not attuned with how we as humans are built, of course, this is not good for our problem-solving capacity. And I find that designers work more attuned to human nature. When I came from engineering into design, one of the things that struck me from the scientific management way, it's as really like a square peg in a round hole situation. And the way that scientific management works is actually more suited to robots than to humans. And because designers, they accept that human creativity is messy, and they use processes and tools only to enhance creativity and not to limit it. They're very picky about the processes and the tools they use, because they always look at what does this bring for my creativity. And I found that in scientific management, this is sometimes the other way around, that humans are actually serving the processes and serving the tools instead of the other way around, which is really ineffective for human creativity. And co-creation is also, of course, an important thing, because if you can get people together, make them enthusiastic, create synergy between people, this, of course, enhances our problem-solving capacity. And I found that in my career that design is a common language that can really bring people together. I was telling this story of the Tower of Babel. I was reading it to my son the other day, and I found that God, in this story, found a really good way to sabotage human problem-solving capacity. Because what he did, of course, we all know the story, he gave all people different languages, because he knew that if people cannot really talk to each other, then they can never achieve great things. And what I learned from design is that visuals are a great common language to bring people together. If you can connect, if you make prototypes, visuals, people from all levels and all departments can really come together. Learning ability, so also an important one for complex problem solving. What I found also is that designers are better learners. And this comes because designers master something that's called double loop learning. Like single loop learning is you have a strategy, you see the results, and you might update your strategy a little bit to get better results. But double loop learning is that you also change your mental model of how do I see this problem, how do I see myself, how do I see the world. So designers, because they're more open-minded, are better learners. In Buddhism, they call this the beginner's mind. There's a great quote explaining that. The beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert mind, there are few. What I found, the designers are much more open-minded. They can have a lot of knowledge and experience, but they don't come into projects thinking that they know all the answers or thinking they can create certainty while there is none. And I found that other people working in project under the scientific management mental model, they always pretend to have all the answers and always think they can solve anything, but actually this is very limiting for their learning capacity. Trust, always also important. You have to, if you complex problem solving is really a scary thing because there's a lot of uncertainty. It's difficult, so you have to really trust yourself, trust your team. And I found that designers, they're actually more comfortable with uncertainty. You might even say that designers wallow in a state of uncertainty. And I think this comes because they're constantly trained to act in situations of uncertainty. This already started in art school when you get like very vague assignments and very uncertain project, and you really have to find a way to get out of that. But they get out of it. They get so they start trusting themselves that they can get out of these problems. And it's also like later on when you work in a design agency, the design briefings are always very vague and very uncertain, and most of the time the clients don't even know what they want or what they need. So you're constantly in a situation of uncertainty. But also designers start to appreciate this, because uncertainty is also filled with all possibilities. And dialogue with matter is maybe a little bit of a strange thing, but it's one of the most wonderful things I found when I went into art and into design. It's maybe you've heard of people talking to trees, but designers actually talk to objects to find solutions. Maybe the best way to explain this is like a carpenter who works with wood. And wood, there are some pieces are stronger, some pieces are not so strong, and the wood bends in one direction better than the other. And a good carpenter listens to the wood. And if he listens to the wood, his products will get better and get stronger. And if you take this one step further, you come to Michelangelo, who says that the sculpture is already completed within the marble block. I just chisel away the superfluous material. So he said, the block of marble in the studio already wanted to be a statue of David, and all he did was listen to what the block of marble wanted to become. And I found this goes for all things, for code, for internet, cars. Everything around us has a desire to become something. And there's also this nice quote of Marshall McLuhan: we shape our tools, and our tools shape us. We're in a constant dialogue with the things around us. And if we start to listen to this, we can really enhance our problem-solving capacity. The last point I wanted to share with you today is about question finding. I think most people think complex problem solving is about solution finding, but finding the right question is actually much more important. And one of the things I learned is that designers can use design as a way to get to the right questions. The best way I could think of to explain this is like a pinball machine. And as a way to explain the navigating of this problem-solution space. Because in a pinball machine, you get to the top of the playing field by bouncing the ball off of pins. And this is a little bit also how this works for designers. They start with a problem, which leads to a solution, but the solution uncovers a new, more interesting problem, which again leads to a new solution, and so on and so on. And this is how you can really innovate by interacting between solutions and problems. And I think this is the most powerful way of using design. If you use design as a means and not as a goal to make pretty things, but as a means to find the right questions, then design is at its most powerful, because as Elon Musk said, if you find the right question, the answer is relatively easy. So these are some of the things I experienced that really boost problem-solving capacity. The systems thinking, seeing objectively, outside-the-box thinking, personal responsibility, aligning to human nature, platform for co-creation, learning ability, trust, dialogue with matter, and question finding. But I think the biggest challenge is the transfer. How can we use the skills of the designers have developed on non-design problems? And how can we get the things people learned, designers learned in this simple problem solving onto the complex problem solving? Because it's not design as designers normally work on projects. And I think this is this is the million-dollar question for design thinking. This is what design thinking is all about, transferring the skills of designers to complex problem solving. But what can you do? How can you tap into the way of the designer? I think a good place to start this afternoon, you're going to do a couple of workshops where you're maybe going to learn some design thinking techniques, and you're going to see some results. But I think I would like to challenge you to not just look at the techniques you will learn there, but also try to challenge your own mental model. Like, what does this technique or this way of working, what does that mean for how I see myself, how I see the world? So you could take a stab at this double loop learning. Because the greatest unexplored territory in the world is the space between our ears. And if you want half a chance at solving the problems that Toos explained to us, I think we have to really up our problem-solving game. So thank you. And if you want to connect with me, I'm online, so thank you very much.